It was 2 in the morning when the private jet clawed its way into the pitch-black sky above California. There was no flight plan filed with the usual press contacts, no royal entourage, and absolutely no announcement. Inside the cabin, there was just one passenger, a prince who hadn't slept in 36 hours and looked like he wouldn't sleep for another week. Prince Harry wasn't flying back to London for a ceremony or a family reunion. He was hurtling across the Atlantic because his aunt Sarah Ferguson had just placed a call that didn't just threaten to ruin his reputation, it threatened to erase the entire reality he had built his life around. The message was simple, terrifying, and impossible to ignore. Sarah wasn't just gossiping, she was warning him. She had materials, she had letters, she had recordings, and she was done protecting the people who had thrown her to the wolves. As the coast of California faded into the dark, Harry realized that the woman waiting for him back home wasn't the only one with secrets. The Duchess of York was ready to talk, and what she had to say was going to make the Spare's memoir look like a fairy tale, but he had no idea that the flight was the easy part. What was waiting for him at the Royal Lodge was a dossier that would rewrite history. To understand why Harry was in a panic, you have to understand the shift in Sarah Ferguson. For years, she was the punchline, the outcast, the one the royals tolerated but never respected. She watched from the sidelines as Meghan ascended from actress to global icon, and she watched as Harry burned bridges to protect his wife. But something snapped in late 2025. Maybe it was Prince Andrew's legal troubles finally forcing her hand. Or maybe it was the realization that, while she was being silenced, others were profiting from a victim narrative that she knew for a fact was incomplete. Sarah went on Piers Morgan's podcast and dropped 2 words that instantly sucked the air out of the room: first client. She didn't stumble over the words. She didn't say it by accident. In the high-stakes world of the elite, the word client implies a transaction. It implies an arrangement. It suggests that Meghan's introduction to the royal orbit didn't happen on a blind date with Harry, but years earlier through his uncle Prince Andrew. Sarah was alleging that Meghan wasn't a stranger to the toxicity of the palace. She was a participant in it long before she ever wore a tiara. And Sarah claimed she had the receipts to prove it. But accusations are one thing. Proof is another. And this is where the story takes a dark, tangible turn. As Harry sat on that plane disconnected from the World Palace, insiders began sending him the details of what Sarah was holding. It wasn't just memories. It was physical evidence. The first blow came from the driver's logs. Andrew's personal driver, a man who had already testified under oath regarding the Epstein scandal, had kept meticulous records. These weren't vague recollections. We are talking about dates, pickup times, destinations, and passenger names. According to these logs, Meghan wasn't a one-time visitor. Her name appeared in the transport manifests multiple times over a period of months. The pattern was undeniable. High-security pickups, discreet locations, and a level of privacy usually reserved for the most special guests. If these logs were authenticated, they destroyed the "we barely knew each other" defense instantly. Coincidence happens once. A pattern documented in a chauffeur's logbook is an arrangement. And Harry, reading these messages via encrypted texts at 30,000 feet, felt the floor drop out from under him. But the logs were just the paper trail. The real damage was personal. Sarah claimed to possess handwritten letters. Now, in the digital age, a text can be faked and an email can be spoofed. But handwriting is intimate. It's biological. Sarah told Piers Morgan that she had correspondence from Meghan to Andrew that was far too familiar to be professional. These weren't "thank you for the tea" notes. These were letters referencing inside jokes specific details about the layout of the yachts and mentions of staff members by their nicknames, details you simply cannot know unless you were there, and unless you were there often enough to get comfortable. If these letters were released, they would prove that Meghan had a relationship with Andrew that involved a level of comfort and intimacy that she had never disclosed to Harry. Imagine the betrayal. You've fought your family, you've sued newspapers, you've claimed your wife was a naive outsider, bullied by the institution. And now you're staring at proof that she was writing friendly, intimate letters to the very man you've publicly condemned. But Sarah had one more weapon in her arsenal, and this one was nuclear. She had audio. Sarah claimed to have recordings of conversations between Andrew and Meghan from those so-called yacht days. Voice is a dangerous thing because it carries tone. You can explain away a photo, you can claim a letter was taken out of context, but hearing your wife's voice relaxed, laughing unguarded, speaking to a man she claims she barely knew, that is visceral. It bypasses logic and hits you straight in the gut. According to Sarah, the recordings captured a dynamic that was undeniably familiar. It was the sound of two people who understood each other, who shared secrets, and who were operating in the same shadowy circles. While Harry was trapped in that metal tube crossing the Atlantic, the timeline began to collapse. This is the part that truly breaks the narrative. Palace sources, knowing Harry was unreachable and unable to coordinate a spin with his PR team, decided to rip the Band-Aid off. They sent him the 2009 proof, a time-stamped photograph from a private London party. In the frame, Meghan and Andrew. The date, 3 years before Harry and Meghan supposedly met. But it got worse. The intel floodgates opened. Sources allege that the contact didn't stop in the past. They claimed the relationship overlapped with Harry's own courtship. Witnesses, including Yacht staff, claimed to have seen Meghan at Andrew's properties just 6 months before her engagement to Harry. Let that sink in. While Harry was falling in love, while he was introducing her to his grandmother, while he was planning a wedding that would cost millions, Meghan was allegedly still in contact with the man who would become the monarchy's biggest liability. If true, every conversation Harry had ever had with her about trust was a lie. By the time the plane began its descent into Heathrow, Harry wasn't just a worried husband, he was a man questioning his own sanity. He landed in a London that felt colder than usual. He bypassed the usual security protocols and went straight to the Royal Lodge. This brings us to the confrontation. The atmosphere at the lodge was heavy, silent, and suffocating. But when Harry walked into the drawing room, the most telling detail wasn't who was there, it was who wasn't. Prince Andrew was missing. The man at the center of the storm, the man who allegedly brought Meghan into the fold, was nowhere to be found. His absence screamed of cowardice and guilt. Instead, Harry found Sarah Ferguson sitting at a table, a simple folder in front of her. She wasn't gloating. She wasn't angry. She looked like a woman who was tired of carrying the weight of other people's lies. She didn't scream or shout. She just slid the folder across the mahogany table. Harry opened it. Silence filled the room for what felt like an eternity. The letters were there. The handwriting was unmistakable. The dates were recent, far too recent. Sarah then played the audio. Just a snippet. But it was enough. Meghan's laugh, her cadence, speaking to Andrew with a familiarity that made Harry's blood run cold. Sarah's message was brutal in its honesty. "I'm not doing this to hurt you, Harry. I'm doing this because Andrew won't protect you, the palace won't tell you the truth, and she certainly never intended for you to know." Sarah refused to give him the originals. She knew better. She told him point blank, "These are your copies. The originals are in a vault, and they stay there unless you help me when my book comes out." It was leverage. Cold, hard leverage. Harry left the Royal Lodge without a word, clutching a folder that contained the death of his worldview. But while he was reeling in private, the public world was catching fire. The media coverage was split, but the internet remains undefeated. As soon as news broke that Harry was in London alone, the internet sleuths went to work. They started building timelines that matched Sarah's allegations perfectly. Old tweets deleted Instagram posts from Meghan's past, and obscure society photos were dug up and cross-referenced with Andrew's known movements. The conspiracy was starting to look like a documented history. The US media, usually Meghan's shield, found themselves paralyzed. They couldn't ignore the driver's sworn testimony, but they couldn't pivot fast enough to save face. And then came the details of Sarah's book, The Rise and Fall of the House of York. This wasn't a memoir, it was an indictment. Leaked excerpts showed that Sarah had structured the book like a prosecution. She had footnotes, she had appendixes, she cross-referenced Meghan's travel dates with flight logs and witness statements. She didn't use vague terms like "I felt." She used concrete terms like observed, recorded, and verified. She was positioning Meghan not just as a hypocrite, but as a key figure in the entourage of a man whose reputation was in tatters. The book threatened to do the one thing Harry had always feared. It threatened to make him look like a fool. Harry had built his brand on being the truth teller, the one who saw through the palace's lies. If Sarah's book proved that he had been the most deceived person of all, his credibility would be incinerated. He wasn't the hero saving the damsel. He was the mark. He was the distraction. Harry sat in a London safe house, the folder on the table next to him, his phone buzzing with messages from California that he couldn't bring himself to answer. He realized that Sarah's ultimatum was a trap with no exit. If he denied the evidence, Sarah would release the originals and prove him a liar. If he accepted the evidence, he would have to admit that his marriage, his war against his family, and his entire identity were built on a foundation of sand. Sarah Ferguson had detonated the bomb. The shrapnel was flying. And as Harry looked at the evidence of his wife's secret past, he realized that the plane ride home was going to be much, much longer than the one that brought him there. The truth was out, and this time no amount of PR spin could put the genie back in the bottle. But here is the question that should keep you up at night. If Sarah Ferguson has this much evidence, what does the palace have? Because if the outcast of the family has the receipts, imagine what the king has locked away in the archives. Harry might have thought this was the end of the story, but the reality is, this is just the first chapter of the real exposure. And what happens next won't just shock the world, it might just end the monarchy as we know it.